and everyone else here. So, hi everyone, welcome. Today's webinar is a greenwashing crackdown. We will be talking about how to comply with new EU rules and how to build consumer trust. My name is Arina. I'm a growth marketer here at Circularize, and I will be your host for today. This webinar is being recorded. So in case you want to rewatch it or you want to share it with your team, or for people who are not here and who will be watching it back, we will send the recording to all of you, so you feel free to access it at any time after the session. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. As I already mentioned, let us know from where you're joining, who you are. We'd love to meet you to see who is here with us today. So a bit on the structure of today's webinar. The webinar will be around 1 hour long, and we will spend the last 7 to 10 minutes on a Q&A. So please drop your questions in the questions tab. It's also on your bottom right of the screen, right next to the chat. It's better if you ask your questions in the questions tab and not in the chat tab, because then it makes it easier for us to keep track of all of them and just answer them at the end of the session. You can just write them down there at any point when they pop up, and then we'll spend some time looking through them at the end. So that was on me and on the structure. Now let me actually introduce our speakers for today. So here we have Amanda Herrera Miranda and Serena Garibaldi. Amanda is a policy researcher here at Circularize, and Serena is a public institutions officer. Both of them will be walking you through two major EU directives today. How to avoid legal pitfalls, how to implement best practices in your companies to make credible, verifiable claims, and much more. So yeah, hi guys, welcome. Good to see you here. I think we can also start.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for the introduction, Arina. And yeah, let's kick it off. So before we actually delve into it, we wanted to ask how confident all of you are with your current sustainability claims, and if you think they would be able to withstand regulatory scrutiny as of how you're doing your reporting at the moment. You'll be able to vote on the screen. Well, now that we've voted on this, it actually gives us a really great starting point, because whether or not you're confident or unsure, today's session is going to help you have some clarity on this and have the proper tools to act on your sustainability claims. A bit of an overview of how today's session is going to look. We're first going to delve into the current landscape of the greenwashing regulations in the EU, what's going on. Then we'll go into the Empowering Consumers Directive. We'll walk you through the Green Claims Directive, which is a proposal at the moment, what this means for EU companies, and we'll have some space and time for closing remarks and questions. So the current landscape, what is actually going on in the EU? There's a lot of words we hear: greenwashing, green whispering, green wishing, a lot of potential for green incentives, for green regulations. However, the most predominant one is greenwashing. Greenwashing is the misleading, exaggerated, or unsubstantiated environmental claims that a lot of companies or organizations are making to appear more sustainable than they actually are. There's certain elements that we need to pay extra attention to, and it's the fact that it's misleading and it's exaggerated, and it's hinting towards something that is not actually the case. As I was saying, this is a very big problem in the EU right now, as regulatory scrutiny is increasing and the claims are as well. This leads us to the space for the webinar right now and why greenwashing is under fire. This is a result of consumer trust eroding because of the claims that are taking place. And as a result, regulators in the EU are taking action. What this is actually looking like right now is that companies that are not able to adapt are going to face a loss in transparency and a loss in consumer and investor trust. And specifically in the EU market context, this will lead to a loss of market access. While this may seem scary and as a very big issue and problem, it also leads to a very big window of opportunity for businesses and companies. Because if you're able to comply and withhold to this regulatory scrutiny and compliance, if you're able to withhold and prove where your information is coming from and back up what you're saying, you're going to increase consumer trust, enhance your brand reputation, And then most importantly, you're going to future proof your operations so that whatever you say today is going to stand tomorrow and actually help you drive your business growth. Before we dive in, looking specifically at the green claims, these can be a lot of things, but in the context of the EU policies and directives that we're going to be exploring, there's two main things that we have to keep in mind. They can be either written or oral. The implication that this has is that it doesn't just have to be a written statement that you make. It can be in your advertisement videos, it can be in your social media, it can be in every single campaign or PR that you put out. So any sort of communication that you make, written, oral, anything that has a neutral, reduced, or positive environmental impact will be subject to these regulations. Think of yoga plants made from recycled plastic bottles, the marketing of Reef Safe sunscreen. Our company has reduced environmental footprint by 15%. Any type of environmental narrative, message, or communication that you're trying to put out that has any sort of environmental impact connotation will be subject to the regulation. Given the issues that are taking place in the EU right now, and to give a bit of a context, as of the data released by the European Commission, around 50% of the green claims that are made in the EU are vague, misleading, or unverifiable. And this sets the backbone for these two really big pieces of regulation that the EU is putting through. This leads us to the two main ones that we're going to be focusing on today. The Empowering Consumers Directive, which is already in place and was adopted February last year, 2024, and the one that is coming, Green Claims Directive, which is at the moment proposed. As I was saying, the narrative in the EU is getting more and more complicated with the increase in green claims and greenwashing. And although, as the graph shows, we're able to see that the amount of high severity green claims are decreasing, it's become so normalized that while the high severity green claims decrease, we have seen an exponential growth over time of the low severity green claims. So while we are very careful not to make big, bold statements, the fact and the threshold that we're actually tolerating and allowing for smaller, unsubstantiated claims is rapidly increasing. And as a result, we have these two pieces of regulation that are willing to put a stop to this phenomenon.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Rima, for setting the scene. And once again, welcome everyone. We're now going to dive into the legislative framework of the Empowering Consumer Directive, which is a directive that amended the two existing EU laws that were the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive and the Consumer Rights Directive. And as you can see, they were both dated in 2005 and 2011, respectively. So it means that the market and in general consumer needs accordingly were very different that they are right now. So the goal of this new directive is to strengthen consumer protection from greenwashing and, as the title says, to move towards the greener transition. So that is still, once again, the ultimate goal of the Green Deal for the EU to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And this directive, as Amanda anticipated, entered into force last year in February 2024. And as of next year in March, member state will need to implement this into the national legal system, and rules will become applicable as of the 27th of September 2026. After that, after 5 years, so that means 27th of September 2031, the Commission will submit a report on the application of these new rules of the directive. So, scope in general of this new piece of legislation is to ban vague and unverifiable claims that are self-certified eco-labels and misleading information on repairs and lifespan. So no more misleading environmental information or claims from business to consumer in the EU market. So, and with this legal framework in place, I'll now pass it again to Amanda for some concrete examples.
As Serena just explained, this is really putting a stop to the lack of information and misleading information that is shared with consumers right now. So to put this a bit in more into a practical example, what this can look like for everyday consumers is your traditional, this t-shirt is made 100% of eco-friendly and climate neutral, or 100% recycled materials. Unless you actually have a way to back this up, this is not something you're going to be able to say anymore. Why? Because it has absolutely no indication or information attached to it as to what actually makes it environmentally friendly or clean. What are the raw materials behind it? What's the production? Are we only speaking about 100% recycled materials for the raw materials produced, or is the production process looking completely different? What about the emission transports? So every aspect of the supply chain is going to have to be accounted for. So looking into this, there's the new rules that are going to be completely changing the way that the claims are made based on the offsets. So they need details on the emissions measured, as I was saying before, is this actually carbon neutral or not? And the part that is reduced versus offset. This is all going to play a really big role into the environmental claims that you make. The other side of it is, if you actually have the data to back up these claims, there's several things that you're going to have to make. You're going to need to specify the aspect of the product that is actually eco-friendly. So as I was saying, is every single raw material eco-friendly? Are they all organic? What is the claim that you're actually making? Is it just the label that is made from recycled cotton? Is it the complete t-shirt? And you're going to have to be able to prove that claim. One of the tools that you can use to make these claims are digital product passports. However, it is important to point out that these are tools that you can use to make these claims verifiable. However, they're not the compliance mechanism itself. So these will be third-party verified. However, these are one of the tools that you can use to achieve these. So we're going to look into avoiding vague terms like sustainable, green, carbon neutral, and move towards more substantiated green claims that are specific. One of the green claims that are being made in the market right now and are completely verifiable is, for example, Samsonite's new case collection. We have the Proxys circular suitcase, as they mentioned, has an impressive total share of 65% biocircular and recycled materials. This comes with a label and a QR code that you can actually scan and will take you directly to the digital product passport of the suitcase, where you can find a detailed overview of the complete supply chain of the product, which is exactly the type of sustained, verifiable, and transparent claim that we are looking to make as consumers in the EU and producers.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's now take a step back and see how the various member state has already taken step to implement this directive. As we see it before, it needs to be into the national rules by 2026. So Spain, for example, drafted this sustainable consumption law as a meaning to transpose the directive, where consumer rights like repairability and durability are included. We see also Denmark has already introduced this February a new bill to amend three of their previous acts. They are the Marketing Practices, the Consumer Contract, and Consumer Complaints Act, all, of course, to explicitly align with the new rules, with some provision that are gonna take effect already this year, and the rest in line with the deadline of 27 September 2026. And of course, other EU member states are moving accordingly. We have France also that has started to develop a national framework to prevent greenwashing, and that is the Climate and Resilience Law, as well as, of course, other EU member states. Of course, as anticipated, there are real-world consequences. A clear example can be found in the KLM case, where in March 2024, the Dutch court found that the company was faulty of greenwashing on their Fly Responsibly advertising campaign. So indeed, it was used the term sustainable and responsibly to describe these alternative aviation fuels, which the court ruled that it was misleading for consumers, as using this so-called SAF was a measure that only marginally lessened the environmental impact of the aviation company. So that was giving the wrong impression, let's say, that flying with KLM was actually sustainable, while there was no direct link between the customer's tangible contribution and the impact of the CO2 emission from its flight. And as we all know, flying is not the most sustainable mode of transport that is in place, but this advertisement, of course, was primarily aimed at improving the company environmental image. And there are various like new case law on that. Another pending case is the one on Apple, that is now at the center of a class action lawsuit where the carbon neutral labeling that supposedly is going to render the company carbon neutral by 2030 is now under a new case study.
So, based on what Serena just said, we have another question that we're curious about, and it's, do you use any digital tools to manage or verify your sustainability data as of right now? Moving forward, we're going to start with the next piece of legislation, which is, again, important to point out, the one that is still on its way. So now we're going to be switching towards the Green Claims Directive, which is a proposal that the EU is making to strongly regulate the way that the market right now, or producers and companies, are making their green claims. This one works alongside and is building on the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. This one's from 2005, and the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transitions Directive, which is the one we just spoke about. The main aim of this directive is to really work hand in hand with the Empowering Consumers Directive to make sure that there's at least the least amount of gaps possible for producers and companies to wiggle their way around the EU regulations with the green claims that they make. So the main goal is to ensure environmental claims are accurate, verifiable, and backed by evidence.
So before actually delving into the directive, let's see the legal definition of what is a green claim. So we see that a green claim is any message or representation that is not mandatory under Union law in any form. So it can be a text, a picture, graphic, a symbol, and that can be on the label or on the name of the brand, the company, or in the same product name. So in whichever context of commercial communication that states or implies that a product or a whole product category, brand, or trader has a positive or zero impact on the environment, or also that is less damaging than other products within the same category. So what does it mean? It means that it applies to all voluntary, explicit environmental claims that are made in the European Union for consumers, which are not regulated by any other EU acts. So that can be, for example, the organic product, the EU eco-label, or the ESPR. So in general, we can say that this proposal will function like a safety net for all sectors where environmental claims or labels are unregulated. And what is important to keep in mind is that it's not meant to change existing or future sectoral rules. So, for example, of DSPR, we know that as of next year and also in the future, there are going to be some delegated act targeting precise products categories. For example, we have textiles, but of course, not every single piece of textile or product is going to fall under this directive. So in case this regulation, so in case there is a more specific EU rules that applies to that product, the Green Claims Directive then will come as secondary, while for everything else, this will be the main rule to become applicable.
Looking into the actual contributions that the Green Claims Directive is going to be contributing to the market, it's that mainly what used to be a very free market claim where You could say whatever you wanted and state it as you wished. Now we're going to move towards a system where you have compared environmental claims that need to be clear, fair, and not misleading. So, for example, we're going to be looking into if you make claims such as product X has lower impact than product Y, all these things are going to be falling under the directive, even if you're not giving statistics or even own the product itself. Just the fact that you're making these comparisons to your product or different types of comments, attributions, or hinting towards a lower environmental impact, like we were discussing earlier, is going to be subject to the Green Claims Directive. As Serena was mentioning, all the labeling schemes across EU member states, because of the harmonization principle in the EU, where all products have to be received and sold the same way across member states, are going to be subject to this rule. Whereas, on the other hand, for non-EU public labeling products, they will be able to request approval before entering the EU market so that they're able to sell and promote their products accordingly under the Green Claims Directive. So now we're going to a system where all environmental claims need to be reviewed and updated at least every 5 years so that they remain compliant. So as the regulations change and become perhaps more stringent also, they're going to be needing to adapt at least every 5 years. Some examples of how this will be looking like for consumers in the EU is that if you make claims such as the product is 100% recyclable packaging, okay, but then you're going to be looking into the conditions and the availability of the recycling facilities. All these things you're going to have to be able to sustain and communicate. For carbon neutral delivery, you're going to be needed to calculate the emissions and the offsetting of the actual delivery costs. For eco-friendly detergent, you're going to need to explain and provide the specification criteria that you're using to make sure and understand something to be an eco-friendly detergent. And for claims such as sustainably sourced cotton, you're going to need substantiated claims with your supply chain traceability. So this is another area where DPPs or digital product passports, for example, would be an excellent resource to employ.
Yeah, so as Amanda explained, every means of commercialization is going to fall under this directive. Labels, whether physical or not, but also advertisement, website, packaging, and so on.
The substantiation criteria, again, is going to be looking very similar to the Empowering Consumers Directive because these both go hand in hand. So now, again, we're going to need them to be scientifically proven and transparent. So the claims needs to be widely acceptable with scientific evidence. So again, a harmonized approach as to how you're substantiating these claims. They have to be specific. Is it just one part of the product? Is it the entire product? And you have to disclose any sort of trade-off. So yes, while your product may be low in emissions, if that comes at the cost of it being in a very high water usage, that's something you're also going to have to disclaim. And the life cycle based impact assessments that you need to be reporting. Whereas on the other side, for the third party verification, you will not be able to self-verify anymore. And it needs to be independently verified before you actually put your product into the market. This will need to be accredited by third parties and applies to every type of individual claim, as well as the eco labels that come with them. For the consequences of non-compliance, interestingly, here we start to see some sort of comparison or similarity to other EU pieces of regulation. Here, the fines are completely proportionate to your company's size and revenue, which is very similar to, for example, how GDPR works. With the Green Claims Directive, we're going to be looking into an up to 4% of the company's annual turnover is going to be subject to fines and regulation. This is just a financial aspect. Other than this, you're going to be able to face potential product withdrawals, advertising bans, the exposure to class action lawsuits, and overall reputational damage and a loss of investor confidence. When we look at the way that this could lead to market exclusion, it can be for a maximum period of 12 months from public procurement processes and also access to public funding from EU institutions.
Of course, now, as Amanda explained, this is still a proposal. So right now we are still in the negotiation phase, and the file is being debated within the INCO, that is the Internal Market Committee, and the environmental one. As we know from the European Commission work program for 2025, this directive is set to be concluded this year, with the negotiation and trialogue taking place already in this month. But we don't know whether the file can actually be finished before the summer. So we will see whether green claims in general will also be taken as a priority with the upcoming Danish presidency. And we know that now the various sectors are a bit divided when it comes to feeling towards this new proposal, as some advocate for more simplification, as the fear is that if the rules will be too strict, then many more companies are going to fear somehow of making some climate statements. So we will see how this develop. Of course, we know that in general, the trend with this new EU institution term is to simplify the legislative framework of the European Union. So hopefully this will not be too hard to implement. The important aspect will be to be able, of course, to substantiate our green claims. And in fact, we've seen the trend, for example, of a digital product passport that is become more and more let's say, expanded into the EU legislative framework. So we have the eco-design regulation, battery regulation, the toy safety regulation was accepted some months ago, and of course the Critical Raw Material Acts, all mandating digital product passport. So for a company to be able to trace materials throughout the whole supply chain of the product. And the same is happening also in upcoming EU rules. So DPPs are mentioned, for example, in the detergent regulation, the waste framework directive, and also the upcoming end of life of vehicles regulation that is already in place in the Union, but it's going to move from a directive to a regulation. So in general, we can say that the idea of the Commission will be to expand DPP so that most products that are on the EU internal market are actually can be traced by consumers and also other companies. So to actually, let's say, fulfill the circular economy also. And as we know, Circular Economy Act is also something else that is going to happen next year. So hopefully DPP will also be part of that new legislation.
As Serena was mentioning, this is not just a new piece of legislation, it's a growing trend in the way that the EU market is looking right now. And given this, it's also no secret that it's had been a problem for a while. There's a case where one of the big oil companies was or is subject still to a lawsuit that was placed by several NGOs and environmental groups that were accusing this company of greenwashing because of the claims it was making. The company was claiming that they had a long history of driving innovation and were actively driving progress towards achieving carbon neutrality. This is a very vague claim. However, just to understand and put into perspective how really specific this can get, this claim, with how general and basic it was, just hinting towards carbon neutrality, not even making really specific statistical claim, was already subject and is right now in court. This is a company that, if we were to apply this case to the Green Claims Directive, this company has approximately an annual revenue of 180 billion euros. If we apply the green claims principle of 4% of their annual turnover being subject to these new regulations, this company would be able to have a fine of approximately 7.18 billion euros. just to compare and understand the magnitude of what these fines are going to be able to look like. And this fine is just the actual direct financial impact that you would get from a regulatory perspective. What we're trying to emphasize here is that it goes really beyond that. What you don't see in this number, it's the loss of investor trust, the loss of market access, the loss of consumer trust, your brand reputation that is completely going to get destroyed. So preventing this and getting ready to comply, and not just comply for the regulatory aspect of it, but having a more far-fetched vision and seeing that this is not just right now I need to comply with this aspect for the EU, but it's also a really big business opportunity where you can approach different audiences, expand your markets, and appeal to people in different ways that is going to future proof your operations, not just from a regulatory perspective, but also from a market and brand additioning and positioning way. The way that the timeline for these two pieces of regulation is going to look is they're very interconnected. March 2023, the Green Claims Directive proposal went through. And in September, the Empowering Consumers Directive was supposed to be defined and harmonized for this year. However, we're looking into a final adoption expected for green claims sometime this year, perhaps third or fourth quarter. And by 2027, the deadline for companies to comply with the Green Claims Directive will take place if it stays up to calendar as it is expected right now. This is an overall visual so that we can understand a bit better the difference between the two. However, rather than seeing them as two separate pieces of legislation, it is important to remember that they really complement each other. So they build on top of each other, and the Green Claims Directive comes and serves as a way to cover any sort of loopholes that companies or organizations could be having with the Empowering Consumers Directive. So both of these together aim to go hand in hand and really scrutinize and fill any gaps in the market right now to protect customers and the EU market as a whole. So we have different objectives. The scope is different. It applies to similar organizations, and they differ also in the enforcement mechanisms. However, they do go hand in hand and overall just close off the EU market for any sort of loopholes for environmental claims or regulations that are not substantiated. To close this off and better get an idea of what this actually looks like, because I realize that it may sound somewhat tragic and difficult, everything that we've been saying. However, it's very much doable. As I was mentioning before, it's not just a compliance requirement, but it's also a business opportunity. And one of the companies that has been really leveraging this business opportunity is Samsonite. Samsonite just released their new Essence and Proxys circular luggage lines, and they're making very bold green claims. One of them says, after disassembly, the shells are shredded and mixed with other post-consumer recycled content to create the new suitcase shells. The total share of recycled materials in the outer shell is at least 80% by weight. This is a very specific and strong environmental or green claim. However, it's completely substantiated. How? With Circularity's digital product passports. This gives data of over 30 global suppliers, including up to tier 3. It provides a verifiable reporting and recycled also for bio-circular materials. And it's done through a digital product passport that is accessible for consumers and producers via QR code. So when you access this QR code, you're going to have screenshots of the DPP or the QR interface that are going to give you a complete breakdown of the way the supply chain for the specific product looks. So this is an excellent example of how, yes, it is important to comply and adhere to these regulations, but you can also take them a step further and leverage them as a unique business opportunity and selling point later on. So Samsonite is really leading the market right now in a way that a lot of other companies were not doing yet. It is still early enough. There is still a lot of time to take advantage of this window of opportunity before the regulation goes into place. So before 2027, there will be an opportunity to leverage these opportunities and really enter the market and position yourself as such a strategic actor to really be a leader on green claims that are substantiated and verifiable. So where does all of this lead us? Basically, the EU is really showing that the age of voluntary claims is over. So fragmented compliance is really not going to be tolerated anymore. So no more making green claims that are unverifiable, no more manipulating the claims you make to appear more user friendly, more repairability, easier access to perhaps spare parts. All these things are not going to be tolerated anymore. We're facing ourselves with a new market that is more unified, more harmonized, and more regulatory compliant. So any claim that you make now is going to have to be proven, not just marketed. A marketing strategy that is strong, green, and really appeals to your consumers and users is just not going to be enough anymore. You're going to need to be able to back everything you say up and show and explain exactly how you're doing this. And those companies that are actually able to embrace this opportunity are going to lead the way. One of the main messages that we really want to communicate is that yes, this is a regulatory compliance aspect. However, it is also a business opportunity. DPPs are not just part of, for example, the Green Claims Directive right now or the Empowering Consumers Directive. We're facing so many additional pieces of EU legislation that if you have a strong digital product passport, will make your life easier. You will be able to comply. You will be able to sell yourself as the brand that you want yourself to be, and you will be able to be perceived exactly the way you want to. So, green claims, empowering consumers, and all these different claims that you're making are a business opportunity that can be leveraged, not just for compliance, but also for business opportunities. And that is it from our side. If you guys have any questions.
Thank you guys for this. We do indeed have a few questions. I can see already that Serena's answered one of them directly in the chat, but we still have quite a few. So maybe we can just go forward. I can just make it up on the screen so you can answer it. The most upvoted one is here. It's the ESPR regulation requires a DPP, but the timeline for implementation is not yet clear. For other items like batteries, the battery regulation requires a DPP. Would it make sense to move towards a DPP now?
Thank you for the question, first of all. So my answer in general will be yes. This is, of course, not only to consider the compliance aspect of the DPP, but also in terms of risk assessment and resource efficiency. And in general, now, if I'm not mistaken, during the month of April, the Commission actually published the working plan for the ESPR. So we have some product categories with a more detailed deadline of implementation of a DPP. Of course, delegated act per se are not already being published, but I think that if I'm like for iron, it's going to be from 2026. So hopefully this will come sometime soon, and the same for textile and so on. And even though there should be some postponement, there is only going to be a postponement. So sometime in the future, companies will still need to use a DPP for their product. As we mentioned, there is the detergent regulation, toys, for example, as of 2030, every toy that is placed on the EU market will need to come with a DPP. So yeah, I think, of course, that in general, like having a tracked proof and like transparent trace ability system for your materials is, of course, of incredible value. And of course, that's also related to the ESPR. I would also,
Perfect.
thanks, Arina. There is another question on the green claims verifiability by a third party. As the directive is still a proposal, I cannot give an answer for sure 100%, but what I can say is that I believe that it's going to be likely somebody from directly the member state. So I think that every member state will appoint an authority to become the third party verifier, if that is what you mean. And I see that Christian, you also asked another question on the information on the labeling scheme. And in the proposal right now, there are two labels that is either like the public scheme or the private scheme. So public one will need to follow the rules of EU institution under member states, and the private one are the one that are going to be developed, I think, by companies and NGOs and so on. And of course, ISO standards, even if they are not directly mentioned in the proposal, are gonna play a huge part of this, as they are a meaning of actually prove the claim directly. So yeah.
Okay, I think we don't have any more questions. I see our other teammate Jan also answered the third question from Christian in the chat. Yeah, I think this was it. Thank you so much, everyone. It was great to having everyone here. Yeah, thank you, Amanda and Serena, for their presentation. Again, this was completely recorded, so you will all get an email with the recording, and if you want to share it with your team or just rewatch, feel free to do so after. Yeah, so I guess it's a wrap. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.